There's something people don't talk about very often when it comes to building a different kind of life. You hear a lot about discipline. You hear a lot about consistency. You hear a lot about hard work. But there's another part of the journey that shows up quietly once you start thinking differently about your future. Loneliness. Not dramatic loneliness, not the kind where you suddenly have no one around you, but a quieter version of it. The kind that appears when the direction your life is moving starts to look different from the direction most people around you are moving. Hi, I'm JP, and lately I've been noticing that building something different often means walking through seasons where very few people truly understand what you're trying to do. When you begin thinking seriously about building something long-term, your priorities start shifting. You start thinking about time differently. You start thinking about money differently. You start thinking about the future differently. Decisions that once felt normal suddenly start feeling unnecessary, and choices that once seemed extreme start feeling logical. You might spend less money. You might work on something most people can't see yet. You might start turning down certain opportunities because they don't align with what you're trying to build. And over time, those small changes start creating distance between your priorities and the priorities of the people around you. One of the strange parts of building something is that for a long time, the work is invisible. There's no obvious result yet, no clear milestone, no big announcement that tells the world something meaningful has happened. Most of the effort exists quietly behind the scenes. Planning, learning, testing, trying again. From the outside, it can look like nothing is really happening. But internally, everything is changing. And because that work is invisible, it's difficult for others to fully understand the process. Another thing that begins to shift is the nature of conversations. When your focus changes, the topics that interest you start changing too. You might find yourself thinking about long-term strategy while others are focused on short-term comfort. You might be thinking about building systems while others are thinking about spending the next bonus. Neither approach is wrong, they're just different. But over time, you may notice that fewer conversations feel aligned with what's occupying your mind every day. And that's where the quiet loneliness can begin. One realization that eventually becomes clear is that most people are not trying to build something beyond their current life structure. They're trying to maintain it. They want stability, predictability, a life that feels safe and manageable. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But if your path starts moving in a different direction, you can't expect everyone around you to feel the same urgency or curiosity that you feel. Most people are simply solving different problems. When the journey begins to feel lonely, there can be a quiet temptation to slow down or stop. Not because you stopped believing in the goal, but because being aligned with the people around you feels easier. It feels comfortable. There's less friction, less explaining, less feeling like the odd one out in certain conversations. But building something different almost always requires tolerating that friction for a while. Because if you constantly adjust your direction to match the comfort of everyone around you, the path you're trying to follow will slowly disappear. One of the important lessons in this stage is learning to respect the paths other people choose. Just because someone isn't trying to build something the same way you are, doesn't mean they're doing life incorrectly. People value different things. Some people prioritize stability. Some prioritize freedom. Some prioritize experiences. Some prioritize security. None of those choices are automatically wrong. But once you decide what you are building toward, Your responsibility is to stay consistent with that direction, even if others are choosing something different. The interesting thing about the journey is that while the early stages can feel lonely, something often changes over time. As you keep building, you start noticing other people who think the same way. People who also value long-term thinking. People who also understand delayed gratification. People who also believe that patience and structure can lead to something meaningful. And when those paths cross, the loneliness begins to fade. Because suddenly, the conversations feel familiar again. Not because everyone is the same, but because the mindset is shared. Before that happens, though, there is usually a quiet season, a period where the work continues mostly in private, where the direction feels clear internally, but not always obvious externally. This is the stage where discipline becomes especially important, because the external validation is still very small, and the future result is still mostly theoretical. So the motivation has to come from something deeper, from belief, from commitment, from the understanding that meaningful things often take longer than most people expect. Building something different doesn't just change your finances or your career. It slowly changes how you see the world. Your priorities shift, your decisions shift, your conversations shift, and sometimes that process creates a sense of distance between you and the people around you. Not because anyone did anything wrong, but because the paths are different. That loneliness can feel uncomfortable. But it can also be a signal that you're moving in a direction that requires a different kind of thinking. And over time, that path tends to connect you with people who are walking a similar journey. Until then, the work continues quietly, step by step, day by day. I'm JP, and I'll see you in the next one.